The scream that tore through the Keeler trading post sent every man reaching for his pistol. But it was just a young woman reacting to a barrel lid falling 3 feet away from where she stood. Theresa Granger pressed herself against the wall, both hands clutched to her chest, her breathing coming in ragged gasps that made the storekeeper's wife rush over with concerned murmurs. The year was 1883, and Keeler, California was a rough silver mining town on the eastern edge of the Sierra Nevada, where the desert heat baked everything under its relentless sun, and men rarely noticed when someone was suffering from something they could not see. Russell Fairbanks watched from where he leaned against the counter, his order of rope and tobacco forgotten. He had seen soldiers come back from the Apache campaigns with that same look, that same wild-eyed terror at sounds that meant nothing to anyone else. The young woman could not have been more than 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a gray traveling dress that had seen better days. She was pretty in a delicate way that seemed wholly unsuited to this harsh landscape, and as she tried to apologize to the storekeeper's wife in a trembling voice, Russell found himself wanting to know her story. "I am sorry, Mrs. Patterson. I do not know what came over me," Theresa was saying, her southern accent still thick despite what must have been months of travel. "It was just the noise, I thought perhaps. Hush now, dear, you have had a terrible time of it, Mrs. Patterson said, shooting warning glances at the other customers who had turned to stare. "Why do not you come in the back and have some tea? You look positively done in." Theresa shook her head quickly, almost frantically. "No, I need to get back to the boarding house before dark. I just came for the thread and needles I ordered." Russell collected his goods and paid, then stepped out into the dusty street as the afternoon sun beat down on the false-fronted buildings that lined the main thoroughfare. Keeler was not much to look at, just another mining town that had sprung up almost overnight when silver was discovered in the nearby Inyo Mountains. The population had swelled to nearly 1,000 souls, most of them rough men who worked the mines or the smelter, with just enough women and families to give the place a veneer of civilization. He had been in Keeler for 3 months now, working as a ranch hand for Samuel Pritchard, whose cattle operation supplied beef to the mining camps. Russell was 26 years old, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that he kept short. He had grown up in Nevada, learning to ride and rope before he could properly read, and he had spent the last 8 years drifting from job to job across the West. He was good with horses, better than most, and had a reputation for being able to gentle even the most difficult animals without breaking their spirit. The boarding house where he kept a room was the same one where Theresa Granger was staying, though he had only seen her in passing before today. She kept to herself, taking her meals in her room and venturing out only when necessary. The landlady, Mrs. Chen, a practical Chinese woman who had come to California during the gold rush and stayed to run one of the few respectable establishments in town, had mentioned that Miss Granger was recently widowed and looking for work as a seamstress. That evening, as Russell sat on the front porch of the boarding house after supper, he heard Theresa's door open upstairs. Her footsteps were so soft on the wooden floorboards that he almost did not notice them, but then came the sound of the water pump creaking in the backyard. He waited a few minutes, then went around the side of the house to find her struggling with the pump handle, which had a tendency to stick. "Let me help you with that," he said quietly, but even his soft words made her jump and spin around, water sloshing from the bucket she was trying to fill. "I can manage," she said quickly, her eyes wide in the gathering dusk. "I know you can," Russell said, staying exactly where he was and not moving any closer. "But that pump has been ornery all week, takes a particular way of handling." She studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her face, the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Finally, she stepped back and gestured to the pump. Russell approached slowly, telegraphing every movement. He worked the handle with a practiced motion, and cold water soon gushed into her bucket. When it was full, he stepped back again, giving her space. "Thank you, Mr. Fairbanks," she said softly. "You know my name, Mrs. Chen mentioned you were the only man boarding here who was not a drunk or a troublemaker. She said you were quiet and paid your rent on time, which makes you practically a saint in a town like this." There was the faintest hint of humor in her voice, and Russell found himself wanting to hear more of it. "Well, I would not go that far," he said, "but I do try not to cause problems where I am staying." Theresa picked up the bucket, and he noticed how her hands shook slightly with the weight. "Good evening, Mr. Fairbanks. Good evening, Miss Granger." He watched her carry the water inside, moving carefully as though she expected something to jump out at her from every shadow. Whatever had happened to her, it had left marks deeper than any physical scar. The next morning, Russell was up before dawn as usual, heading out to the Pritchard ranch that sprawled across the valley floor north of town. The work was hard but honest, and he spent the day helping to break a string of young horses that Samuel had bought from a Paiute trader. Russell had always had a gift for reading animals, understanding what frightened them and how to ease those fears. He never used harsh methods, never believed in breaking a horse's spirit to make it obedient. Instead, he worked with patience and consistency, showing them that he was not a threat. By the time he rode back into Keeler that evening, his shirt was soaked with sweat and his muscles ached, but there was a satisfaction in knowing he had made progress with even the most skittish of the young colts. As he stabled his horse at the livery, Tom Brennan, the blacksmith, called out to him, "Hey, Fairbanks, you know anything about that woman staying at Chen's place? The nervous one?" Russell felt his jaw tighten. "Cannot say that I do." "Why?" Brennan shrugged, hammering at a horseshoe on his anvil. "Just curious. She came by earlier to see if I knew anyone who needed sewing done. Seemed like she was about to faint from just talking to me. Odd sort of woman." "Maybe she has had some hard times," Russell said evenly. "Most folks out here have." "I suppose," Brennan agreed. "Anyway, I told her to talk to Mrs. Patterson at the trading post. They are always looking for someone who can do alterations and mending." Russell nodded and headed back to the boarding house. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen preparing supper, and the smell of her cooking made his stomach growl. She made the best dumplings he had ever tasted, and her soups could revive a man after the longest day. "Mr. Fairbanks, you are just in time," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Supper will be ready in 10 minutes. Miss Granger will be eating downstairs tonight." I convinced her it would do her good to have company. Russell must have looked surprised because Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly. "She cannot hide in her room forever, and you are a good man, Mr. Fairbanks. You will not frighten her." He washed up and changed his shirt, then came down to find the small dining room table set for 3. Mrs. Chen did not take in many boarders, preferring quality over quantity. The only other regular resident was an old prospector named Dutch who was rarely around, spending most of his time up in the mountains searching for a strike that would never come. Theresa appeared a few minutes later, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. She hesitated when she saw Russell already seated, but Mrs. Chen ushered her in with gentle insistence. "Please, Miss Granger, sit down. Mr. Fairbanks does not bite, I promise you." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clink of utensils against plates. Finally, Russell spoke, keeping his voice low and even. Mrs. Chen tells me you do fine sewing work." Theresa glanced up, then back down at her plate. "I do. I learned from my mother, who was a dressmaker in Charleston before the war changed everything. That must be useful work out here. Not many people with that skill. Mrs. Patterson has agreed to give me some alterations to do. It is not much, but it is a start." Mrs. Chen beamed. "That is wonderful news. You see, things are looking up already." Over the next few weeks, Russell made it his business to learn Theresa's patterns and rhythms. He noticed that she always took the same route to the trading post, staying to the wider streets where she could see people coming from a distance. She avoided going near the saloons or anywhere loud voices might carry. And every sudden sound, every unexpected movement, sent her into that same state of rigid fear he had witnessed that first day. He began adjusting his own behavior without really thinking about it. When he knew she was in the house, he moved more carefully, making sure his boots did not thump too heavily on the floorboards. He learned to clear his throat or speak before coming around corners so she would know he was there. Out on the street, if he saw her ahead of him, he would cross to the other side or slow his pace so he would not come up behind her suddenly. It was Mrs. Chen who finally told him Theresa's story one evening after supper. The older woman had a way of knowing when people needed their tales told, and she clearly thought Russell was someone who should understand. "Her husband was killed 5 months ago," Mrs. Chen said as she washed dishes and Russell dried them. It had become a comfortable routine between them. They had a small farm in Texas, near a town called Sweetwater. One night, raiders came, Confederate sympathizers who were angry about something that happened during the war, some old grudge that should have been buried long ago. They burned the farmhouse while she and her husband were sleeping. Russell's hands stilled on the plate he was drying. How did she escape? Her husband woke first when he heard them breaking in downstairs. He made her climb out the bedroom window and hide in the root cellar. She could hear everything that happened. They killed him when he tried to fight them off with his hunting rifle. Then they burned the house to the ground and rode away, shooting their guns in the air and laughing. "God," Russell said softly. "She hid in that cellar for 2 days before she had the courage to come out. She buried her husband herself, sold what little she could salvage, and started traveling west. She said she could not stay in Texas, could not stay anywhere that reminded her of that night. She has been having nightmares ever since." Every loud noise, every man's voice raised in anger, it takes her right back to that night. "Why, Keeler," Mrs. Chen shrugged. "Why does anyone come here? It is a place where you can disappear if you need to, where people do not ask too many questions about your past." She wants to start over, but that kind of fear does not just go away. Russell thought about that conversation for days afterward. He thought about it when he saw Theresa flinch at the sound of a hammer striking an anvil as she walked past the blacksmith shop. He thought about it when she dropped her sewing basket in the boarding house parlor and nearly wept from the frustration of her own fear. And he thought about it late at night when he could hear her pacing in her room above his, unable to sleep. He began finding small ways to help without making it obvious. When he knew she was going to the trading post, he would time his own errands so he could walk the same route, staying far enough back that she would not feel crowded but close enough that his presence might deter any drunks or troublemakers. He asked Mrs. Chen to mention to Theresa that the boarding house had a good solid lock on the front door, and that Mrs. Chen's nephew, who was a deputy sheriff, lived just 2 houses down the street. One Saturday evening in late October, as the desert air finally began to cool from the brutal summer heat, Russell was sitting on the front porch with his guitar, playing quietly. He had taught himself to play during long, lonely nights on various ranches, and music was one of the few things that could settle his mind after a hard day. He was working through an old ballad his mother used to sing when he heard the front door open. Theresa stood in the doorway, backlit by the lamp in the hallway. "Please do not stop," she said softly. "I heard the music from upstairs. It is lovely." "You are welcome to sit if you like," Russell offered, gesturing to the other chair on the porch. She hesitated, then stepped out and settled into the chair, leaving a respectful distance between them. Russell continued playing, choosing songs that were gentle and slow, nothing with sudden chord changes or loud strumming. They sat like that for nearly an hour, not talking, just existing in the same space while the stars came out overhead and the sounds of the town settled into its nighttime rhythms. "My husband played the harmonica," Theresa said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was not very good at it, but he tried. He would play in the evenings after supper, sitting on our porch and watching the sun go down." Russell kept playing, letting her talk or not talk as she chose. "His name was James. We married when I was 19 and he was 21. We had 3 good years together. Not enough time, but good years." "I am sorry for your loss," Russell said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "Mrs. Chen told you what happened, did not she?" "She did. I hope you do not mind. She thought I should understand." Theresa was quiet for a long moment. "I do not mind. It is easier than having to tell it myself. I have told the story so many times to the sheriff, to the judge, to my family. Each time I have to relive it, and each time it feels like it just happened yesterday." "You do not have to explain anything to me," Russell said, setting the guitar aside. "I have known men who came back from war, from Indian fights, from all kinds of trouble. They all had that same look you get when something startles you. That same fear that does not quite go away no matter how safe you ought to feel. Does it ever get better?" The vulnerability in her question nearly broke his heart. "I think so. I think it takes time and patience and being around people who understand. And maybe it never goes away completely, but it gets quieter, easier to manage." "I hate being this way," Theresa said, her voice thick with emotion. "I hate jumping at shadows. I hate being afraid all the time. I was not raised to be a coward." "You are not a coward," Russell said firmly. "You survived something terrible. You buried your husband with your own hands. You traveled hundreds of miles alone to start over in a place where you did not know a soul. That takes more courage than most people will ever need in their entire lives." She turned to look at him, and in the lamplight spilling from the windows, he could see tears tracking down her cheeks. "You are very kind, Mr. Fairbanks. I am just honest. And please call me Russell. Mr. Fairbanks makes me feel like my father." The smallest smile touched her lips. "Then you must call me Theresa." After that evening, something shifted between them. Theresa began joining him on the porch more often, sometimes talking, sometimes just listening to him play. She told him about her childhood in Charleston, about learning to sew with her mother and sisters, about the beauty of the South before the war tore it all apart. She talked about James and their farm, about the dreams they had been building before everything fell to pieces. Russell, in turn, told her about growing up in Nevada, about his parents who had been among the early settlers and had built a successful freight business, about losing his mother to cholera when he was 15 and his father to a heart attack 2 years later. About drifting ever since, never quite finding a place that felt like home. "Why not start your own ranch?" Theresa asked one evening. "You clearly know horses and cattle. Why work for someone else?" Russell shrugged. "Takes money to buy land to stock it with animals. Takes even more money to keep it running until you turn a profit. I have been saving, but it is slow going." "What would you do if you had your own place?" "Raise horses, mostly. Good working horses, not fancy show animals." The kind of horses that ranchers and farmers need, horses with good sense and good temperament, and maybe run some cattle enough to make a steady income. He paused, then added, I would want it to be somewhere with water, somewhere that could sustain life without it being a constant struggle. Maybe up north in Oregon or Washington territory. That sounds like a good dream, Theresa said softly. As November arrived and the weather turned genuinely cold, especially at night when the desert gave up all the heat it had absorbed during the day, Theresa's nightmares seemed to worsen. Russell would wake in the middle of the night to the sound of her crying out in her sleep, and several times he heard Mrs. Chen going up to check on her. He felt helpless, wanting to do something but not knowing what. One night, he woke to the sound of breaking glass and a scream. He was out of bed and up the stairs before he fully registered what he was doing, arriving at Theresa's door at the same time as Mrs. Chen. Miss Granger, are you all right? Mrs. Chen called, knocking sharply. The door opened a crack, and Theresa's pale face appeared, her hair loose around her shoulders and her nightgown visible beneath her wrapper. I am so sorry. I had a nightmare and knocked over the water glass. I did not mean to wake everyone. Let me get a broom and dustpan, Mrs. Chen said. Mr. Fairbanks, perhaps you could make sure she did not cut herself. Before either of them could protest, Mrs. Chen had bustled away down the hall. Russell stood awkwardly in the doorway, very aware that it was the middle of the night and Theresa was in her nightclothes. May I come in? Just to check that you are not injured. She nodded and opened the door wider. The lamp was lit, casting shadows around the small room. Broken glass glittered on the floor beside the bed, and water had soaked into the rug. Theresa's hands were shaking as she held them out for his inspection. Russell examined her hands carefully, relieved to find no cuts. You are all right. No blood. I thought they were back, she whispered. I dreamed they were breaking down the door and I could smell the smoke from the fire. It was so real. But you are here in Keeler and Mrs. Chen's boarding house. You are safe. Am I? She looked up at him with haunted eyes. Will I ever truly be safe again, or will I spend the rest of my life jumping at shadows? Russell did something then that surprised both of them. He reached out and gently took her hands in his, holding them carefully. You are safe right now in this moment, and tomorrow you will be safe again, and the day after that. One moment at a time, Theresa. That is all any of us can do. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest, and he could feel her trembling. Slowly, carefully, he put his arms around her, holding her while she cried. When Mrs. Chen returned with the cleaning supplies, she took one look at them, smiled knowingly, and began sweeping up the glass without comment. After that night, Russell stopped pretending that he was not developing deep feelings for Theresa Granger. He had not planned on falling in love with anyone, especially not someone who was grieving and traumatized, but his heart apparently had not consulted his brain about the matter. He found himself thinking about her constantly, worrying about her when they were apart, seeking out any opportunity to be near her. He became even more conscious of his movements around her, perfecting the art of being present without being threatening. He learned to announce himself with a soft cough or a quiet greeting before entering a room. He kept his voice low and steady when he spoke to her. He never made sudden movements or came up behind her unexpectedly. And slowly, gradually, he saw the fear in her eyes begin to fade when she looked at him. December brought cold winds down from the mountains, and occasionally even a dusting of snow that melted by mid-morning. The mines continued operating, and Keeler bustled with activity as freighters brought in supplies and took out ore. Russell continued working at the Pritchard Ranch, and Theresa's sewing business grew as word spread about her skill with a needle. On Christmas Eve, Mrs. Chen organized a small celebration at the boarding house. She cooked a magnificent feast, and Russell contributed a bottle of good whiskey he had been saving. Dutch the prospector even showed up, clean and relatively sober for once, with a string of quail he had shot up in the hills. They ate and talked and sang carols, and for a little while, the rough mining town felt almost like home. Russell gave Theresa a present he had spent weeks working on, a small wooden box with a carefully fitted lid and brass hinges he had traded for at the general store. Inside, he had lined it with velvet he had convinced Mrs. Patterson to sell him, creating compartments for thread, needles, and other sewing supplies. Theresa's eyes filled with tears when she opened it. "Russell, this is beautiful. You made this yourself." "It is not much, but I thought you could use something to keep your supplies organized. It is perfect." She set the box down carefully and reached into her pocket, pulling out a handkerchief embroidered with his initials in dark blue thread. "I made this for you. I noticed that the one you carry is quite worn." Russell took the handkerchief, running his thumb over the careful stitching. "This is the finest thing anyone has ever made for me. Thank you." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgment of what was growing but neither was quite ready to name. January 1884 arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Russell had been in Keeler for 6 months now, and he was starting to think about what came next. He had saved a fair amount of money, and Samuel Pritchard had hinted that, if Russell wanted to buy some land nearby and start his own operation, he would help him get started. But more than that, he could not stop thinking about a future that included Theresa. One afternoon, as he was working with a particularly nervous young mare at the Pritchard ranch, Samuel came out to watch. The older rancher leaned on the corral fence, his weathered face thoughtful. "That is a gift you have, Russell. Not many men can gentle a horse like that without breaking its spirit. Just takes patience and understanding. Horses are not so different from people. They respond better to kindness than force." Samuel chuckled. "Speaking of which, I hear you have been keeping company with that young widow at Mrs. Chen's place." Russell kept his attention on the mare but felt his ears grow warm. "News travels fast in this town." "It does, and from what I hear you have been good for her, Mrs. Chen says she has not seen the girl smile so much since she arrived. She has been through a terrible time." "That she has. But you know what? I think you have been good for each other. You were looking a bit lost when you first came to work for me, like a man who did not quite know where he belonged. You have got more purpose about you now." Russell thought about that as he rode back to town that evening. Did he have more purpose? He supposed he did. For the first time in years, he was thinking beyond the next job, the next town, the next temporary place to lay his head. He was thinking about building something permanent, something that would last. He found Theresa in the boarding house parlor, working on a dress for one of the mine owner's wives. She looked up when he entered, and her face brightened in a way that made his heart skip. "Good evening. How was your day?" "Good. The mare I have been working with finally let me put a saddle on her without fussing. Took 2 weeks to get to that point." He sat down across from her, watching her nimble fingers guide the needle through fabric. "Theresa, would you take a walk with me tomorrow? It is Sunday and the weather is supposed to be clear. I thought we could walk up toward the lake." She looked up, surprise and something else, something like hope crossing her face. "I would like that." The next day dawned cold but beautiful, with the winter sun sparkling off Owens Lake, just west of town. Russell called for Theresa at mid-morning, and they set out along the rough road that led toward the water. He kept his pace slow and steady, staying beside her rather than ahead or behind, always making sure she could see him. "I have been thinking," Russell said as they walked, "about what I want to do with my life. About where I want to be. And what have you decided? Theresa asked, her breath creating small clouds in the cold air. I think I want to stay in this area, at least for a while longer. Samuel Pritchard has some land he would sell me at a fair price, enough to start a small horse ranch. It would not be much at first, but it could grow into something good. That sounds wonderful, Russell. You should do it. The thing is, he continued, his heart pounding, I find that I am also thinking about sharing that future with someone, about not doing it alone. She stopped walking, turning to face him. The wind tugged at the loose strands of her hair, and her cheeks were pink from the cold. What are you saying? I am saying that I have come to care for you very deeply, Theresa. I know it has not been long since you lost your husband. I know you are still healing from what happened, but I also know that I want to be part of your life if you will have me. I want to be the man who makes you feel safe. The man you can lean on when the nightmares come. The man who will walk softly so he does not startle you, who will be patient while you heal, who will wait as long as it takes for you to be ready to love again. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. I think I am already ready, Russell. I did not think I could feel this way again, not so soon. I thought I would grieve forever, but you have shown me that it is possible to honor James's memory while still opening my heart to new happiness. You have been so kind, so patient, so understanding. How could I not fall in love with you? He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her face in his hands. May I kiss you? Yes, she whispered. Their first kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope. When they pulled apart, Russell rested his forehead against hers. I will not ask you to marry me yet. I want to do this properly, give you time to be sure. But I am asking if I can court you, Theresa Granger. If I can spend my evenings with you, take you to church on Sundays, introduce you to people as the woman I am hoping to build a future with. Yes, she said again, laughing through her tears. Yes to all of it. They walked for another hour, talking about possibilities and dreams before heading back to town. That evening, Russell spoke to Mrs. Chen, letting her know his intentions were honorable and asking her blessing to court Theresa under her roof. The older woman beamed and gave them both a lecture about propriety that ended with her offering to teach Theresa how to make Russell's favorite dumplings. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Russell had experienced before. He had courted women before, but never someone who needed such careful handling, such thoughtful consideration. Every date, every interaction required him to be mindful of Theresa's fears and triggers. He learned that she could not tolerate being in enclosed spaces with groups of men, so he never suggested they go to dances or social gatherings where she might feel trapped. Instead, they took long walks, had picnics when the weather allowed, and spent quiet evenings at the boarding house. He learned that she hated the sound of gunfire, even when it was just someone shooting at bottles for target practice, so he always warned her if they were going somewhere that might have shooting nearby. Most importantly, he continued to move softly around her, to be predictable and steady. He noticed that she jumped less when he entered a room, that her hands did not shake as much when he was near. The nightmares still came, but less frequently, and when they did, he was there to comfort her, to remind her that she was safe. In February, Russell bought the land from Samuel Pritchard, 300 acres of decent grazing land with a creek running through it, and enough trees to provide shelter from the summer heat. He spent his free time drawing up plans for a house, nothing fancy but solid and comfortable, with good windows that would let in plenty of light and a porch where they could sit in the evenings. I am thinking 3 bedrooms, he told Theresa one Sunday as they walked the property together, his arm around her waist. 1 for us, and 2 for children when that time comes. and a good-sized kitchen because Mrs. Chen says any woman needs room to work properly. You have been talking to Mrs. Chen about our future home, Theresa teased. She has opinions and she is not shy about sharing them. But mostly I have been thinking about what would make you happy, what would make you feel safe and comfortable. Theresa stopped walking and turned to him. Russell Fairbanks, you are the most thoughtful man I have ever known. Do you know that? I just want to take care of you. You do. Every single day. You have no idea how much that means to me. She paused, then took a deep breath. I think I am ready. Ready for what? For you to ask me to marry you, if you still want to, that is. Russell's heart leapt. Are you certain? I do not want you to feel rushed. I am certain. James will always be part of my heart, but he would want me to be happy. And you make me happy, Russell. You make me feel safe and cherished and hopeful about the future. I love you and I want to be your wife. He pulled her close and kissed her soundly. Then, Theresa Granger, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Will you build a life with me on this land, raise horses and children and grow old together? Yes, she said, her eyes shining. 1,000 times yes. They were married in March in a simple ceremony at the small church in Keeler. Mrs. Chen cried and fussed over Theresa's dress, which Theresa had made herself from pale blue silk that Russell had ordered specially from San Francisco. Samuel Pritchard stood up as Russell's best man, and Mrs. Patterson acted as Theresa's matron of honor. Half the town turned out for the celebration that followed, and if some of the noise and commotion made Theresa tense, Russell was right there beside her, his hand on the small of her back, reminding her that she was safe. They spent their wedding night in the house Russell had been building, which was not quite finished but far enough along to be livable. He had installed the windows and the door, built a proper bed frame, and even managed to construct a cast iron stove for heating and cooking. It was not luxurious, but it was theirs, a home they would build together. Russell was extraordinarily gentle with Theresa that night, understanding that physical intimacy might bring its own challenges for someone who had been through such trauma. But she met him with eagerness and trust, and what passed between them was tender and beautiful, a joining not just of bodies but of two wounded souls who had found healing in each other. Life on the ranch was hard work but satisfying. Russell began breeding horses, starting with 3 good mares he bought from a Paiute trader and a fine stud he acquired from Samuel Pritchard. Theresa continued her sewing business, taking orders from women throughout the mining district. She was also learning to help with the horses, starting with the gentlest ones and gradually building her confidence. Russell continued his practice of moving softly, especially in the early morning or late evening when unexpected sounds might startle her. He learned to whistle a particular tune when he was coming back to the house, so she would know it was him. He always knocked before entering a room where she was working, even though it was their own home. These small courtesies became second nature, and Theresa bloomed under his care like a flower that had been transplanted from poor soil to rich. Summer came with its scorching heat, but the creek on their property kept everything green and alive. Russell hired a young Mexican man named Carlos to help with the heavier ranch work, and Theresa hired Carlos's sister, Maria, to help with the sewing and housework. The 4 of them worked well together, and Russell made sure everyone understood that Theresa had certain needs that must be respected. No sudden loud noises, no coming up behind her unannounced, no roughhousing or aggressive behavior anywhere near the house. In September, Theresa told Russell she was expecting a baby. They had hoped for children but had not expected it to happen so soon. Russell was overjoyed and immediately became even more protective, insisting that she not overwork herself and that Maria take on more of the household duties. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Theresa protested, but she was smiling as she said it. "I know, but I want to take care of you." "Is that so wrong?" "Not wrong at all, just a bit excessive." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are having a baby, Russell. I did not think I would ever have children after James died. I thought that part of my life was over. But here we are, building a new life together." "Here we are," he agreed, pulling her close. The pregnancy was not easy. Theresa was sick for the first few months, and the baby seemed determined to keep her from sleeping comfortably. The nightmares came back with increased frequency, perhaps triggered by the hormones or the stress on her body. More than once, Russell woke to find her crying, not from a nightmare but from sheer exhaustion and frustration. "I am so tired," she wept one night in December. "I cannot sleep because the baby is pressing on everything, and when I do sleep, I dream about fire and death. I am so tired, Russell." He held her and rocked her, wishing he could take on some of her burden. "I know, sweetheart, I know. But you are strong, stronger than you give yourself credit for. You will get through this, and I will be right here with you every step of the way." Their son was born in April 1885, on a warm spring morning when the desert was covered in wildflowers. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Russell feared he might lose her. But Theresa was indeed strong, and when the baby finally arrived, squalling and healthy, she cried tears of joy and relief. They named him James Russell Fairbanks, honoring both her first husband and his new father. Little Jamie, as they called him, had his mother's dark hair and his father's light brown eyes. He was a peaceful baby, seeming to sense that loud crying upset his mother, and Russell joked that even as an infant, his son knew to be gentle around Theresa. Fatherhood changed Russell in ways he had not anticipated. He had always been patient and thoughtful, but now he found himself thinking about the kind of world he wanted his son to grow up in, the kind of man he wanted to raise. He wanted Jamie to be strong but kind, confident but respectful, especially of women who had been through hard times. Theresa took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. There were moments when the responsibility overwhelmed her, when a nightmare would leave her shaking, and she would have to hand the baby to Russell while she composed herself. But there were also moments of pure joy, of nursing her son while Russell read to them both, of watching Jamie's first smile, of the simple happiness of being a family. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. The horse ranch grew steadily, gaining a reputation for producing animals with excellent temperaments and intelligence. Russell's patient training methods attracted buyers from throughout California and Nevada, ranchers and farmers who wanted horses they could trust. Theresa's sewing business also thrived, but as more women moved to the area and competition increased, she gradually scaled back, focusing instead on running the household and raising Jamie. She discovered that she had a talent for managing money, and she took over the ranch's bookkeeping, ensuring that they always had enough saved for lean times. In the spring of 1887, Theresa became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect or perhaps because her body had healed more fully. Their daughter was born in January 1888, during one of the rare snowstorms that blew through the Owens Valley. They named her Rose Ellen Fairbanks, and she was a tiny, delicate thing who looked exactly like her mother. Russell was besotted with his daughter from the moment he laid eyes on her. If he had been gentle with Theresa, he was doubly gentle with Rose, handling her like the most precious thing in the world. Jamie, now nearly 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, though his help was often more hindrance than assistance. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered, the children grew, and Theresa continued to heal from the trauma of her past. She still had occasional nightmares, and there were still sounds that made her jump, but the fear was no longer the dominant force in her life. She had learned to trust again, to feel safe in her own home, to believe that good things could last. Russell never stopped walking softly around her. It had become such an ingrained part of who he was that he barely thought about it anymore. He announced himself when entering a room, kept his voice low and steady in the evenings, avoided making sudden movements. Their children learned to do the same, absorbing the lesson that gentleness was strength, not weakness. One evening in the summer of 1890, as they sat on the porch watching Jamie and Rose play in the yard, Theresa leaned against Russell's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "I am thinking about how far we have come. 7 years ago I was a terrified widow who jumped at every shadow, and now look at me. I am a rancher's wife with 2 beautiful children and a home I love. I am happy, Russell, truly, deeply happy. I am glad. You deserve to be happy. So do you. And I hope you know how much I love you, how grateful I am for your patience and kindness. Not every man would have been willing to court a woman with my particular challenges. Not every man would have been willing to change the way he moved through the world just to make me feel safe." Russell kissed the top of her head. "It was never a burden, Theresa. Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sun sink behind the Sierra Nevada. Jamie, now 5 years old, was teaching Rose how to catch grasshoppers, both of them giggling at their fumbling attempts. The horses grazed peacefully in the pasture, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote began its evening song. In 1892, Theresa gave birth to another son, whom they named Samuel Thomas Fairbanks, after Russell's mentor and Theresa's father. Little Sam was a robust baby with a powerful set of lungs, and he kept the entire household busy with his demands for attention. Jamie and Rose doted on their baby brother, though Rose sometimes complained that he was too noisy. The ranch continued to grow. Russell took on another helper, a young man from town who wanted to learn the horse business. Carlos had become more of a partner than an employee, managing much of the day-to-day work and allowing Russell to focus on training and breeding. Maria still helped Theresa with the house, and the 2 women had become close friends despite the language barrier. By 1895, the Fairbanks Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the Owens Valley. They had expanded their holdings to over 1,000 acres and ran a herd of nearly 200 horses at any given time. Russell had built a proper barn, several outbuildings, and had even added on to the house, giving each child their own bedroom and creating a spacious parlor where Theresa could entertain the ladies who came calling. The children were growing up strong and healthy. Jamie, now 10 years old, was already showing his father's gift with horses. He spent every free moment in the stables, and Russell had begun teaching him the finer points of training. Rose, 7 years old, was more interested in books and sewing, often sitting with her mother in the evenings while Theresa taught her the stitches her own mother had taught her decades ago in Charleston. Sam, the baby at 3 years old, was a whirlwind of energy who kept everyone on their toes. Theresa's nightmares had become rare, occurring only a few times a year now, usually triggered by some specific reminder of that terrible night in Texas. But she had learned to manage them, to remind herself that she was safe, that Russell was beside her, that her children were sleeping peacefully in their rooms. The jumping at sudden sounds had also decreased, though she still preferred quiet environments and became anxious in crowds. One autumn afternoon in 1896, as Theresa was hanging laundry in the yard, a stranger rode up to the house. He was a rough-looking man, bearded and dusty from travel, and he did not call out a greeting before dismounting. Theresa froze, her hands clenching the shirt she had been about to hang, her heart suddenly racing. The man started walking toward her, and she took an involuntary step back. "My husband is in the barn," she managed to say, her voice not quite steady. "If you have business here, you should speak to him." "I am just looking for some water for my horse," the man said, his tone not particularly friendly. Did not mean to startle you, but he had startled her badly, and she could feel the old panic rising in her chest. Where was Russell? Why was this stranger here? Her mind began spiraling, taking her back to that night 13 years ago, to the sound of strange men's voices, to the smell of smoke and fear. Then she heard it, a familiar whistle, the tune Russell always used to announce himself. Relief flooded through her as her husband appeared from the barn, moving quickly but not running, his expression calm but his eyes alert. He had clearly seen the stranger and Theresa's reaction. "Can I help you?" Russell asked, positioning himself between the stranger and Theresa without making it too obvious. "Just need some water for my horse," the man repeated. "Been riding all day from Independence. The trough is over by the barn. Help yourself." Russell's voice was friendly enough, but there was an edge to it that made it clear the man should water his horse and move on. The stranger nodded and led his horse to the water. Russell stayed where he was until the man had finished and ridden away, then turned to Theresa, who was still standing frozen by the clothesline. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, taking her hands in his. "I thought I was past this," she said, frustrated tears spilling down her cheeks. "It has been so long, Russell. Why did I react like that? Because some scars do not fully heal, and that is all right. The important thing is that you are safe now. I am here, the children are here, and that man is gone." She leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I am sorry." "Do not be sorry. You have nothing to apologize for." He held her for a long moment, then said, "How about we finish hanging this laundry together, and then we will go inside and have some of that apple pie you made this morning?" She nodded, managing a small smile. "That sounds perfect." As they worked together, hanging the clean clothes to dry in the warm afternoon sun, Theresa reflected on how different her life was now compared to that terrified young widow who had arrived in Keeler 13 years ago. Yes, she still had moments of fear, still jumped at unexpected sounds sometimes, but those moments were the exception rather than the rule. She had built a good life here, surrounded by love and security. That evening, after the children were in bed, Russell and Theresa sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was cool and sweet with the scent of sage. "Thank you," Theresa said softly. "For what?" "For always being there when I need you. For understanding that healing is not a straight line, that sometimes I will take steps backward. For never making me feel weak or foolish for being afraid." Russell took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You are the strongest person I know, Theresa. What you survived would have broken most people, but you kept going. You built a new life, raised beautiful children, created a home full of love and laughter. If you occasionally get frightened by a stranger showing up unannounced, well, that is just common sense in my book." She laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Russell Fairbanks. I love you too, Theresa Fairbanks. Always have, always will." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Jamie grew into a fine young man, working the ranch alongside his father, and showing every indication of taking over the operation one day. Rose developed into a talented seamstress and artist, selling her embroidered goods in shops throughout the valley. Young Sam proved to be a natural horseman, fearless and skilled, though his parents worried constantly about his tendency to take risks. In 1900, Theresa and Russell celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary. They were both in their early 40s now, Russell's hair touched with gray at the temples and Theresa's face, showing the fine lines that came from years of sun and laughter. But they were as devoted to each other as they had been on their wedding day, perhaps even more so, for they had weathered storms together and come through stronger. The ranch had become something of a landmark in the region, known not just for its excellent horses, but for the quiet kindness of its owners. Russell had a reputation as a man who would help a neighbor in need, who treated his employees fairly, who trained horses with patience rather than force. Theresa was known for her charity work, her willingness to help new mothers or widows who found themselves in difficult circumstances. She never forgot what it was like to be alone and afraid, and she made sure that no woman in the valley had to face such circumstances without support. One day in the spring of 1901, as Theresa was working in her garden, she heard riders approaching. She looked up to see a small group of men on horseback, and her first instinct was to hurry toward the house. But then she recognized one of them as Sheriff Morrison from Lone Pine, a man she had known for years and trusted completely. "Mrs. Fairbanks," the sheriff called out, tipping his hat. "Is your husband about?" "He is in the south pasture with Jamie, checking on the new foals." "Is something wrong?" "Nothing urgent. We are just looking for some stock to remount a few of our deputy horses. Russell's animals are the best in the valley." Theresa smiled, proud of her husband's reputation. "I will ride out and fetch them if you would like to wait here. Maria can bring you some cool water." She was able to do this now, to ride out across her own land without fear, to speak confidently to men she did not know well, to handle situations that would have paralyzed her with terror 18 years ago. The healing had been slow and sometimes painful, but it had happened nonetheless. As she rode toward the south pasture, Theresa thought about the journey she had traveled. From the ashes of that terrible night in Texas to this beautiful valley in California, from a traumatized widow who could not bear sudden sounds to a confident rancher's wife who could look sheriffs in the eye and negotiate horse sales. Russell had made that journey possible with his gentle patience, his soft footsteps, his understanding that her healing could not be rushed. She found Russell and Jamie examining a young chestnut colt with a perfect white star on his forehead. Father and son looked up as she approached, both of them smiling at the sight of her. "The sheriff is at the house," she called out, "looking to buy some horses for his deputies." Russell nodded and began walking toward his horse. As always, his movements were economical and quiet, the habits of nearly 2 decades so ingrained that he probably could not be loud and sudden if he tried. Jamie had picked up the same mannerisms, moving with the same thoughtful grace as his father. They rode back to the house together, the three of them, and Theresa felt a profound sense of contentment. This was her family, her life, her home. The past would always be part of her, would always cast the occasional shadow, but it no longer defined her. She had moved beyond survival to truly living. The sheriff's visit resulted in the sale of 4 excellent horses, and Russell's reputation grew even more. Orders for Fairbanks' trained horses began coming in from as far away as Los Angeles and San Francisco, and Russell had to hire 2 more helpers just to keep up with the demand. By 1905, the Fairbanks family was well established and prosperous. Jamie, now 20 years old, had announced his intention to marry the daughter of a rancher from Bishop. Rose, 17, was being courted by a young man from Independence who worked at the bank. Sam, 13, was still convinced he would become a Wild West show rider, much to his mother's dismay. Russell and Theresa were now in their late 40s, entering the stage of life where they could begin to step back a bit from the daily grind of ranch work and enjoy the fruits of their labor. They had built something substantial, something that would last long after they were gone. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching yet another spectacular sunset, Theresa said, "Do you remember that first day we spoke, at the water pump behind Mrs. Chen's boarding house?" "I remember everything about those early days," Russell said. "I remember thinking you were the most frightened person I had ever seen, and the bravest, all at once. I was terrified of everything, of shadows, of sounds, of my own memories. And then you came along with your soft footsteps and your gentle voice, and slowly, gradually, you showed me that the world could be safe again, that I could be safe. We healed each other," Russell said. "I was lost before I met you, drifting from place to place with no real purpose. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something that mattered. We built a good life, did not we?" Theresa said, reaching for his hand. "The best life," Russell agreed, "better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear Sam practicing his guitar, the notes floating out through the open windows. Rose was in her room, likely sketching or reading. Jamie was at his intended's house in town, courting the way proper young people did. "I jumped at every sudden sound I heard," Theresa said softly, speaking the words that had defined so much of her early life in California. "And you learned to walk soft around me." That simple act of kindness, of adjusting your whole way of being to accommodate my fear, that changed everything for me, Russell. It showed me what real love looks like. "Real love is paying attention," Russell said. "It is noticing what the other person needs and doing your best to provide it. It is being willing to change, to adapt, to meet them where they are rather than demanding they come to you. You have always met me where I was. Even now, after all these years, you still move carefully when you come into a room, still announce yourself before approaching me in the yard. You probably do not even realize you are doing it anymore." "I do not think about it," Russell admitted. "It is just part of who I am now, part of how I love you." Theresa leaned over and kissed him softly. "And I love you for it. I love you for seeing me, not just the damaged parts but all of me. I love you for your patience and your kindness and your steadfast presence in my life. I love you for giving me children and a home and a reason to wake up each morning without fear." "I love you for your strength," Russell replied, "for your courage in facing each day even when it was hard. For your willingness to trust me, to let me into your heart even when you had every reason to keep it locked away. For making me a better man than I ever thought I could be." They kissed again, and this time it was deeper, full of the passion that had never faded even after 22 years together. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "Come to bed," Theresa whispered. "I want to show you how much I love you." Russell stood and offered her his hand, pulling her to her feet. Together they walked into the house, past the children's rooms, to the bedroom they had shared for more than 2 decades. And there, in the home they had built together, they made love with the tenderness and passion of 2 people who knew each other completely, who had weathered every storm together, who had learned that the strongest love is the one that adapts and grows with time. The years that followed brought the expected changes that come with aging. Jamie married and built his own house on the eastern section of the ranch, eventually giving Russell and Theresa 3 grandchildren. Rose married her banker and moved to Independence, where she opened a shop selling her fine embroidery and needlework. Sam, surprisingly, settled down and became an excellent horse trainer, even better than his father in some ways, though Russell would never admit it out loud. Russell and Theresa gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to Jamie and Sam, though Russell never fully retired. He still worked with the horses, still trained the difficult ones that needed his particular touch. Theresa continued her charity work and spent hours teaching her granddaughters the sewing skills her own mother had taught her long ago in Charleston. In 1915, as World War I raged in Europe, Russell and Theresa celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary. They were in their early 60s now, their hair gray and their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work. But their love had only deepened with time, maturing into something rich and unshakable. One warm summer evening, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Theresa's hair was loose around her shoulders, something she only did in the privacy of their home, and Russell's arm was around her waist. "You ever think about Texas?" Russell asked. "About James and the life you had before?" "Sometimes," Theresa admitted. "But it feels like a different lifetime, like it happened to someone else. James will always be part of my story, but you are my life, Russell. You have been my life for more than 30 years. I am glad we found each other," Russell said simply. "Glad that you came to Keeler all those years ago, terrified and alone. Glad that I was there at Mrs. Chen's boarding house in the right place at the right time." "It was not just luck," Theresa said. "It was meant to be. We were meant to find each other, to heal each other, to build this life together." They sat watching the stars come out, comfortable in the silence that comes when two people know each other so well that words are unnecessary. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their grandchildren playing, the voices of their children discussing ranch business, the comforting noises of a family home. "I still walk softly around you," Russell murmured, his lips close to her ear, "even after all this time." "I know," Theresa said, turning to kiss him. "And I still love you for it. I will always love you for it." As they sat there under the vast California sky, surrounded by the life they had built together, both Russell and Theresa knew that their love story was one for the ages. It was a story of trauma and healing, of fear and courage, of a man who learned to walk softly around a woman who jumped at every sudden sound. It was a story of patience and understanding, of two wounded souls who found wholeness in each other. But most of all, it was a story of love, pure and simple, the kind of love that changes people for the better, that builds something beautiful out of ashes, that endures through every challenge and grows stronger with each passing year. And as the moon rose over the Sierra Nevada, casting silver light across the ranch they had built together, Russell and Theresa Fairbanks held each other close and knew that they had found exactly what they had been searching for, even when they had not known they were searching for anything at all. They had found home in each other and in the life they had created, and that was the greatest gift of all. Their golden years were spent in contentment, watching their children and grandchildren thrive, knowing that the legacy they were leaving was not just land and livestock, but the example of what real love looked like. They taught their family that strength could be gentle, that healing took time, that the most profound acts of love were often the quietest ones, like learning to walk softly around someone who needed that particular kindness. Russell and Theresa lived to see their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933, surrounded by 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. They passed away within months of each other in 1934, both in their 80s, Russell going first in the spring and Theresa following him that autumn, unable to imagine life without the man who had walked softly through her life for more than half a century. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the shade of a cottonwood tree Russell had planted the year they married. Their headstones bore simple inscriptions with their names and dates, But the family knew that their true memorial was the ranch itself, the land they had tamed together, the horses that still bore the gentle training methods Russell had perfected, the tradition of kindness and understanding that they had instilled in their children and grandchildren. And sometimes, in the quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the cottonwood leaves, people swore they could hear the soft footsteps of a man who had learned to walk carefully through life, and the grateful sigh of the woman who had loved him for it, together still in whatever lay beyond. Their love story complete but never forgotten, a testament to the healing power of patience, understanding, and a love that learned to adapt to what the other person needed most.